Oh, it's the most wonderful time. It's the most. So, we're recording this on the 23rd of December, 2022, 2 days before Christmas. And so I thought I'd ask you a bit about this season, Christmas and the season in general, from a symbolic point of view or cultural point of view, or perhaps even from a practice point of view. What comes to your mind in this kind of a season?
Well, I think the thing to start with is that, of course, not everybody's doing Christmas, right? I mean, there's lots of people who don't observe Christmas, but what we all do in our bodies, regardless of where we then put the symbology or the tradition or the myth or the cultural thing, is in the rhythms, right? We have body rhythms and we have circadian rhythms and we have kind of seasonal rhythms that direct our body into certain kind of behaviors. And I think that's really interesting when you look at the choice of holidays and when you look at the choice of rituals and all of that, because if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, right, where Christmas was conceived, so to speak, what we're looking at is the super dark nights, right, and the very, very short days. And of course, it's cold and there's, an angle to the sun and all of those things. And we have a solstice, which just happened a couple of days ago, right? And that is the longest night and the shortest day in the Northern Hemisphere, and of course the other way around in the Southern Hemisphere, which is kind of also interesting when you look at what that means around New Year's rituals and stuff, which we'll talk about at another time. But when it's really dark and when the nights are very long and when it's cold, things happen in the body, and things happen kind of in our psyche and in kind of our mythological body, so to speak. And they kind of intersect, and that's always been really, really interesting to me because of course, having grown up in Austria, which is a country that firmly does Christmas, and there's a lot of very specific traditions around the Christmas time and the solstice time and the time after Christmas that's rooted in Celtic traditions, and where kind of the pagan traditions were fused with the Christian traditions into something that when you look at it from a little bit further out, which is the body and the rhythms of the body and how our circadian rhythms work, makes total sense. So I've always loved that whole, how it fuses together. So essentially, the darker it is and the less sun we get, the less active we are in digestion as well as in our endocrine system. And then as the days goes lighter, we become more and more active, right? There's more sex hormones, there's more dopamine, there's more serotonin, like it kind of swells as the sun goes longer, and then it goes back down as the sun goes shorter and the days go shorter. And when you look at all the traditions around Christmas and the solstice, they're all about going inward, resting, taking a break, eating differently as well. Of course, our ancestors couldn't import fruits from Peru or South Africa or wherever in the winter. They had to eat what there was, and there wasn't a lot of fresh, produce, and there wasn't a lot of colorful fruit or whatever available. So the eating changes, the kind of heavy foods, the fats, the kind of protection for the body, which ties in, of course, with the holidays. And then all these rituals around bringing back the light and illuminating the dark night and giving extra light to not only our body, but also our kind of psyche and our soul by candles, by, Yule fires or bonfires, solstice fires, Christmas decorations. All of those things make total sense when you look at how do you deal with things like seasonal affective disorder? How do you deal with really long nights? How do you deal with kind of the feeling of, is the sun ever going to come back? Is this ever going to get bright again? Because, in the ancient days, there wasn't as much light or technology or things available. So all of those beautiful rituals that people observe are grounded in that idea. And I just think that's very beautiful to remember that beyond, buying lots of Christmas presents or doing massive gaudy decorations out on the lawn. There's some real sense and purpose behind these things.
Yes, that's very interesting. Do you do anything special around the solstice, winter solstice, the 21st of December? Does that have meaning for you?
It does, probably equal to Christmas. For me, Christmas, of course, is strongly associated with growing up and my family and my family's tradition, as well as the traditions in my hometown or my home country, which are very specific and they have like really positive, beautiful connotations in my body. So I do observe those as well in varying ways. But solstice was always the moment where you knew it was tipping back into the light. So to me, till this day, that's kind of my new year. That's when I set myself up for the year ahead. So I kind of do the things that people typically do on New Year, on solstice, and I make lists and I do rituals of letting things go, and I light fires and in various ways, either outside or inside, meaning candles and things, or actual fires out on the fire pit. And I let go. I do rituals of letting go, and then I do rituals of calling in. And whenever I can, and in the last couple of years, of course, I've been home, consistently for those for the solstice. I go up on the roof on the morning of after the solstice and sit and watch the sunrise. And that's always kind of a really cool moment, because to me, that's kind of the New Year's sunrise, so to speak, where I sit and till the sun is high enough that I get it in my face and my eyes. And that feels like the new beginning and the very positive stepping into something. And of course, because also typically this time of the year is when we end our work year, right? You and I in the office. This is also kind of the time where naturally we look back at, how has the year gone? What have we accomplished? It's kind of a celebratory feeling. And then there's that little bit of a pause. And then that starts the new year and starts the new calendar and starts new events and things like that. So it's kind of a really cool and fun period for me.
Yeah, I'm wondering about that. How it is you choose which of these special days to mark and how you do them. I wonder, some people say, well, such things are useful for personal, psychological structure. Well, we can mark the solstice. Gives us a sense of some sort of psychological benefit or so. In a way, it's arbitrary in that sense. Other people say, no, actually connecting to these special days, marking them, pausing, it can help one to harness some sort of natural biological rhythm, or maybe even some sort of celestial influence of some kind, right? Some sort of you know potency in the magnetism or something. I don't know what people say. So I'm curious how you land with that. Do you see that these days have actually in themselves some sort of power that can be tapped into, or that one can join in with, or do you see it mainly as a somewhat arbitrary marker for one's own psychological rhythm?
Well, I think that when you look at things through multiple layers, it's really nice to see what stacks up and makes sense. So as I was saying earlier, regardless of how you feel about the holidays, right? Some people hate the holidays, some people don't observe holidays, things like that. Regardless of how you feel about that, there is your endocrine system, there's your nervous system, there's the rhythms that connect us with nature. And when you look at that as the basis, then you can always say, your body, unless you're living in a crazy artificial environment, right? Like 24-hour, artificial light or something like that. Unless you live in that kind of situation, forced or voluntary, your body does orient towards nature, and your body does orient towards light and sleep and things like that. So I think from that viewpoint, these kind of rhythms and the darkest day and the shortest day, the darkest night, definitely does something to the body. And we know now, and we've talked about this before, that sunlight exposure is one of the best and easiest markers to improve health and sleep and endocrine function and stuff like that. So from that level, I think there's an actual physical benefit to being aware of those things and observing them some, or at least observing yourself in the context of those waning and waxing cycles. But then, of course, there's also the more, let's say, soul or psyche kind of based thing, where we as human beings are, very strongly tied to mythology and, traditions and upbringings and things like that. And we do have a home somewhere, kind of a mythological home, so to speak, somewhere where our, how Jung would call it, the collective unconscious rises into certain kind of behaviors or certain kind of meaning making that's meaningful to us and marks certain points, like the New Year, for instance, which is totally arbitrary, right? But because it's collective, it does something, because it's a deadline, where you can kind of go, okay, we're drawing a line in the sand. This is done. This is new. There's a kind of a psychological hope. There's also kind of a collective societal hope and things like that. So, making meaning out of days or making meaning out of ritual is super important for well-being, emotional well-being, or mythic well-being, however you want to say it, psychological well-being. And I think that's something to know. And ritual, any form of ritual, doesn't matter if that's you go shopping on the day before Christmas, or you always go to the neighbors on the 26th in the morning, or whatever it is, or very elaborate, more, let's say, spiritual rituals, a mass, going to a midnight mass, or lighting a candle every day, for a certain amount of days, or whatever it is. Ritual anchors you to kind of your lineage and your ancestors and where you come from, and your societal and mythological birthplace. And that anchoring has a aligning and settling effect, and you can use that to your benefit, and you can use it for your well-being. And I think one of the things we've seen in the pandemic is that when people aren't able to observe their rituals, whatever they are, it has a really negative effect on mental well-being and mental health. And so now that, we're back at a place where most people can do that again, I think it's good to pause and say, yes, that has value. And yes, having family traditions or personal traditions or spiritual traditions or, even commercial traditions, is a good thing because it anchors us.
Yes, that's very interesting. And what about the communal aspect or the community aspect? I know where you are, you have certain neighborly rituals, I suppose. That makes it sound very suspicious indeed. But you have neighborly, things that you do. Maybe you can say something about that. And it's kind of nice to have these fixed points as a group to engage with in a lightsome way. Maybe you could say something a little bit about what it is you do over there and what effect you think it has, perhaps, or what's it for, really?
Yeah, in the vein of when we talk about neighborly rituals, right? Having community, whatever that choice of community is, it could be family, could be chosen friends, could be a spiritual context, is very anchoring, and it is very grounding in a sense that it also allows us to measure ourselves, against the societal backdrop or communal backdrop or things, and of that nature. And there's something really lovely about that. And I also understand for a lot of people it can be super stressful to go home to their family where it's not that pleasant, or where there is a lot of strife or things like that. But even in those moments, there's a real value in feeling where you've been during the time you haven't observed that particular ritual or that particular communal get together, and feel yourself as the human you've become in that time away, right? Or in that time since the last time your holiday happened, or things like that, and be able to kind of take a little bit of stock of where you've grown, or what's been going on, and your positives and your negatives and all of that. And in my community up here, we have a very tight-knit neighborhood, close neighborhood. And of course, we got a lot tighter after the wildfire, because many of us, lost our homes on December 7th. And then, less than 3 weeks later, there was Christmas. And so in that year, the people who still had houses hosted quite elaborate, like potluck Christmas extravaganzas for people who didn't have houses. And that's reinforced what was already there, which is kind of a getting together, taking stock, celebrating, being happy, everybody's still alive, so to speak, right? And also bringing new people from the community in, and having these established rituals of community. And so in how that looks in my neighborhood is that on the 25th, early in the morning, and we're talking early, not like euphemistically early, but we're talking 6 a.m. My next door neighbor, who is a very wonderful man, starts firing up his oven and making the coffee and things like that, and then he gets ready for his breakfast, his Christmas breakfast. And then so around 7:30 the first people start arriving, and typically by 8 there's a full house of people sitting around drinking mimosas at 8 a.m. and having Christmas breakfast. And it's waifs and strays, as well as family, as well as community. And it typically is a moment where everyone just, honors each other in the neighborhood, and it's very lovely. And by the time that's done, most people then go home and do the family things that are traditionally done. So that's a mainstay, and everybody has the dish they have to bring, or in my case, I have to juice oranges because I have the ripe oranges that always get ripe around Christmas. And this year I'm also making quiches and things of that nature. So everybody has their duty, everybody brings something, everybody contributes, and it sets off the day for everyone in a very delightful and often rather boozy way. So that's a mainstay. And then there's a few other ones, where different people have different ways of celebrating. Everybody typically on the 25th who lives around here hikes up the hill after the Christmas meal to walk off some of the heavy food, and then people have mulled wine or drinks or whatever with the neighbors in the evening. So there's all these different ways that the traditions are called in. There's typically a fire involved. There's typically appreciation and toasting involved. So it's very celebratory in a communal way. And I think, to kind of segue from that into what can people do when they are stuck somewhere where they don't want to be in a family situation, or even in a family situation they want to be, is to look for the things that connect people, even if it's a bit odd stuff, right? In my family, there was always that moment when my grandmother would give her gifts, which were always both hilarious and somewhat offensive. And, even though that could have been a very unpleasant thing, the entire family made it like this very hilarious thing of both, seeing what was it going to be this year, and also seeing it as kind of the bizarre quirk of my grandmother, and enjoying it while she was alive. And till this day, everybody still remembers that and remembers her in a very fond way, even though, like I said, it sometimes was, a bit bizarre. and could have been very upsetting, particularly for my mother, who always got some very strange gifts. So, so there is ways to kind of cherish even the very strange stuff in the bigger picture, of course.
Oh, yes, that's very funny indeed. So, of course, I think this leads me to my last question on Christmas and the season. Next week, of course, we'll release an episode all about New Year's and considerations around that, but to do with Christmas anyway. What thoughts do you have for those who are alone on Christmas, don't have access to that community by choice or otherwise, are not able to be with friends or family, for example, and they're by themselves? Is the case for some people, or many of us at some time or another have had that experience. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or reflections to share with those sorts of people.
Yeah, and it can be pretty tough particularly when it's combined with feeling like there's a loss, or feeling that there's a break in, continuation when people get divorced, or when, somebody dies, or, things of that nature. It can be really, really rough when you suddenly find yourself out of those traditions and out of those anchors. And, then there's also, a lot of people that we speak with on, around the holidays, then make that mean something for who they are in the world, and, how they are perceived in society. So there is a lot of really heavy stuff around that. And of course, the first thing always is to say, get as much support as you need, even if it's professional support, so you can make it through the holidays. Okay, this is also true for people who have to get into family situations that are, less than pleasant. But also, I think it's important to remember that because we're such creatures of ritual and habit and tradition, you can create your own, and you can do things that are really meaningful, that don't necessarily involve other people, and that can even honor the loss of someone or a situation, in the sense that you take that into consideration and create a new tradition or create a new set of circumstances. And I think some of us had to do that during the pandemic. And there is things that can be done. I mean, during the pandemic, when we were in the first Christmas during lockdowns and total, not knowing what was happening, I had to essentially, come up with new rituals and new ways of being for Christmas, because I have a huge thing around Christmas Eve. Being Austrian, we do Christmas Eve. And so I kind of made this very elaborate meal, and with all the favorite things I like to eat, and then had a Christmas tree and sat there by myself and really felt the appreciation for those who I missed at that particular moment in time. And also really felt the appreciation for having the situation I had. And it was really impactful. And it's something that I've been doing ever since, as a means of connecting to different ways of looking at things. And there's a certain kind of resilience in that as well. So the important piece here, I think, is that we're all able to make new rituals or create new traditions, and we have cause over that. We don't have cause about losing or over losing things, or being unpartnered, or being away from our family when we don't want to, but we have the ability and the wherewithal to just create something new. And in that going into something new, there's an empowerment, and there's a joy in doing that I think is always useful to remember.
Yes, thank you very much. Is there anything, any final words or thoughts you'd like to say about this topic before we finish this podcast?
Well, I just want to bring it back to the very beginning, that regardless of what the tradition or the belief or not belief or whatever it is that you hold, there is a value in the feeling the body in that cycle of sun and moon, and the way the axis shifts and all of that, and to remember that as why this whole season started, or why these traditions started, and why certain even very commercial things started, and in the remembering back, kind of bringing it back to a much more simple but yet profound aspect of being alive as a human on this planet, I think is always a really good thing to remember.
Thank you very much, Michaela.
Thank you, Steve.